Hello, and welcome to the Logistics Management Podcast Series. My name is Jeff Berman. I'm Group News Editor for Logistics Management Magazine and also the Peerless Media Supply Chain Group. Today, it's a real pleasure to welcome Greg Oberting to our podcast. Greg is founder and CEO of Kansas City-based Rail Modal Group, an intermodal logistics services provider with a network of privately operated intermodal terminals that provide services to inland containerized export shippers. Prior to founding Rail Modal Group, Greg was at Interstate Commodities in Troy, New York from 1994 to 2018. In 2004, Greg assumed the role of CEO and organized a large vertical integration of the company within the United States domestic commodity supply chain. From 2005 to 2015, Interstate Commodities grew commodity assets to more than 40 million bushels of storage capacity, animal feed manufacturing, international trading, agronomy, risk management services and solutions, and also rail car leasing, trucking, and logistics. Interstate Commodities' vertical integration strategy of operating private railcar assets provided the company with a strong competitive advantage within the United States domestic agricultural supply chain for several years. After launching its international trading group, Interstate Commodities rapidly grew into the third largest United States agricultural BCO, exporting more than 100,000 TEUs on an annual basis. And using the same vertical strategy, the company also developed a source-to-demand supply chain model in multiple locations throughout the U.S. Before we bring Greg in, just a little fun podcast fact. Greg and I both hail from the Capital District of New York in the Albany area, and we're schoolmates at the Albany Academy. Hey, Greg, it's great to have you. Welcome.
Thanks, Jeff. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Greg, not everyone is familiar with Rail Modal Group. Why don't you give us a basic overview of the company, and then we can sort of drill down from there.
Okay, Jeff, thanks. So Rail Modal Group is a transportation company that I developed focused on the supply chain for intermodal and moving intermodal container shipments for exports from the United States for processors and suppliers and producers of commodities and products, mostly in the agricultural space, to international destinations throughout Asia and Southeast Asia. So the company was started about 3 or 4 years ago based on a strategy that I developed through all my experience in the commodity trading field for the agricultural products over the last 25 years or so. We were a very large exporter of agricultural commodities like soybeans and things like that. So we ended up divesting that company about 5, 6, 7 years ago, and I moved to Florida. So I spent some time with my family, and I was getting a little tired, and I decided that I needed to start another career because I was in my late 40s and wasn't really ready to retire. Right. So I came up with a strategy that would develop a logistics solution for rural locations that were dislocated from transportation solutions, particularly intermodal. And what I ended up doing is taking a grain elevator facility where large amounts of soybeans are stored in Nebraska, eastern Nebraska. And I took that facility and repurposed it into an intermodal terminal. The best way to describe that, it's like an inland port.
Sure.
And what we do is we take intermodal containers that are in abundance in places like Chicago and Dallas, Texas, for shipments of commodities back to Asia. And what happens, Jeff, the reason why there's an abundance of them is because America imports twice as much as we export in containers. So for every 2 containers that come in to the United States, 1 goes back empty.
Sure.
So developing a solution for that is beneficial to the container shipping companies, the railroad, and it also supports the U.S. supply chain where we're filling, empty freight capacity. So what I did is I worked in partnership with the BNSF Railroad and with a couple of major steamship lines and developed a strategy to reposition those containers that were, in empty locations like Chicago in unit train economics and move them into these inland locations that I was developing, handle those containers in those depots that I built, and have them loaded at locations near that depot, only 5, 10, 15, 20 miles away, with exportable products, bring them back to our export terminal, put them on trains, and then profile those trains to be delivered to the West Coast port terminals, loaded on ships, and then moved for export. So it took a couple, 3 years really to get that fully developed. But once it became developed, it became very, very popular, and it's a wonderful, solution that kind of disrupted the whole intermodal supply chain. So that was a mouthful there. Maybe I could kind of like turn it back to you, and you could kind of pick it apart and cue me with some ideas to how to kind of be a little more granular.
No, that's great. And it's a terrific overview. So obviously it's a really interesting model, a unique model. Let's talk about sort of the asset counts, locations. So for example, the number of containers you guys move in and out of your inland ports on whether it be a daily, weekly basis, just to provide some perspective on the scale of your operations in terms of output and things like that.
Sure, thanks. So the whole supply chain is really it's handling the origination of the empty containers is where it starts. So we operate most of that in Chicago and Dallas, and then we have secondary locations other than that where we also source the containers. So there's very large terminals in Chicago and Dallas, for example. It's called Logistics Park Chicago, and Alliance Dallas is the other one that operates for BNSF.
Yeah.
So trains are coming into those terminals every couple of hours with containers that are shipped in from Asia to go to, say, Walmart or places like that. So they come into those terminals, they're unloaded from the trains, and then they're moved out to the distribution facilities, in a radius around Chicago, say, or Dallas. There's enormous amounts of warehousing that takes place there. So those containers are dispatched to those warehouses, they're unloaded, and then they're returned back to either a depot around Chicago or back into the LPC, into where the containers are loaded back onto trains and leave. So we've arranged the opportunity to have our own sub-depot within LPC, where every day we have containers returning to us empty, and then they're pre-positioned for trains we have going out of LPC, empty profile trains, to come to our terminals. So each train is about 1.5 miles long. It's about 7,000 feet, and it holds about 250 containers. So we'll have a train leave Chicago almost every day or so. The train's loaded with 250 empty containers, and then it's dispatched for, say, Nebraska. Mm-hmm. It takes about 18 hours to get to Nebraska, and then we receive it and we unload the 250 containers into our depot. And then we truck those containers, say, to Tyson Foods, to use as an example.
Yeah.
And Tyson is processing, say, frozen pork and things like that. So we have a schedule of them to load every day. So we deliver them a container. That container is loaded with their product, and then we return it back to our terminal. So we're handling all of those containers that we receive into our terminal. We're handling all of the trucking drayage, it's called, to the terminals or to the facilities that are loading their products in those containers. We're returning it back to our terminal, and then we're doing all the logistics on the ground to move those containers around, pick them up, put them down, put them on the trains. We then have to profile those trains in blocks to go to specific port terminals in Los Angeles and Long Beach. So once that train's fully profiled with 250 loaded containers, mm-hmm. and it's properly blocked to go to, say half the train is going to a Long Beach terminal and half the train is going to go to, say, a Los Angeles terminal, we then release that train and bill it to those destinations, and then the BNSF will send a crew up to pick up the train. So the locomotives are already sitting there. They'll send a crew to pick up the train, and then it'll leave for Los Angeles, which is about a 5-day trip to go to Los Angeles. Yeah. So, in numbers, that when I started, Nebraska was the first one. I started that we were doing a train every 10 days when I started it. And we were shipping primarily soybeans, for example, that we would buy from farmers and we would sell it to customers we have in Asia. So it was entirely, one product almost, and it was a product that we were shipping, ourselves. It wasn't really benefiting anyone else. Fast forward to today, that terminal does a fully profiled train every 3 days, and about 60% of the train is what I call third-party business, which would be like Tyson Foods frozen pork. And then 40% of the business would be our products, which are, commodities that we would buy from farmers, et cetera, and sell to customers in Asia. So there's been a lot of growth in that terminal. And it's also been developed into our full strategy of having a complementary business of our commodities that we buy and sell with, shippers and producers in the area and customers we have over in the Far East and Asia. And then the rest of it would be, agricultural or commodity shippers of food products and agri products and things like that, giving them, optimizing the supply chain and giving them, freight advantages, giving them sustainability, giving them an environmentally friendly solution.
Yes.
There's a lot of benefits here we can talk about why this is better, and I want to get into that. But really, to answer your question, when I started it, we had one terminal shipping about 6,000 containers a year.
Mm-hmm.
That terminal in Nebraska now ships 20,000 containers, just that terminal. And in total, the three terminals are shipping approximately 45,000 containers. So at full capacity, we'll probably be at 100,000 containers combined with those three terminals, in addition to the other complementary assets the company has. But those three are kind of the major anchors of the whole company.
Yeah, great. And certainly speaks to the economies of scale with the amount of just a high amount of TEUs you're moving, the volume, et cetera. And I know you just alluded to the benefits. And obviously, when we think of intermodal, we always think of the sustainability side, the environmental benefits, removing over the road capacity from truck to rail, et cetera. Please go ahead and just share a couple thoughts on that.
Well, so that was kind of one of the real reasons why I started it. It was like Tyson's shipping their products hundreds and hundreds of miles and going like a circuitous route to get to its final destination. Mm-hmm. So just as an example, I feel bad picking on a name, but it's like the kind of it's kind of like my easy explanation of what I'm doing here. So Tyson, they were moving this product that I keep referring to Kansas City, actually, to a little place out right in Kansas City, where it would be moved down there in a reefer van, a shipment form that is domestically oriented, and it would be unloaded into a warehouse, and that warehouse would then have to load that into a rail reefer boxcar, okay, and then it would have to rail out to California and be unloaded from that boxcar into another reefer storage warehouse. And then finally, from that place, it would get loaded into a reefer container and then trucked into the ports in California and then put on a ship. So you have, multiple rehandling, which is going to cause product, packaging degradation. You have costs involved in those rehandling. You have costs involved in the, intermediate facilities that are holding it and handling it. You have trucking miles that are a lot higher. You have multiple forms of transportation that are costly. And so forth. So you have a supply chain that has a lot more cost, a lot more time to get from place to place to place before it gets to its final destination. The security of the product, for various reasons, is less quality, and environmental wise, you have a lot more carbon output for that whole process.
Yeah, for
so
sure.
What we've done is we've done a source loading model. I call it the first mile, where we bring the final transportation form, which is the intermodal reefer container, directly to the production facility and source load their product or commodity into that container there for its final destination. Returns to us, we put it on a train, directly ships to the port. And by the way, when we ship to ports, they're delivered on dock. So our trains move directly through the gates into the terminal. Mm-hmm. They go off the train onto the dock, and then from the dock to the boat, to the ship. So we don't even have to in-gate into the terminals. We go through the gate, which is extremely unique. And that was part of our original arrangement and agreement with the BNSF Railroad. So all of our trains are moving from our terminals directly to the port terminals without ever having to go through a gate, which is incredible, because a lot of people, they watch TV over the last several years and they see, riots in California and containers falling off the side of the boats into the
Yeah.
ocean because you can't get in and out of the terminal.
Yeah.
We've never had that problem, fortunately.
Yeah,
So,
container dwell time is not an issue in this
yeah.
field. Yeah,
And the transit time, Jeff, it takes about 5 days to California, say a couple, 3 days to get, on the boat and out. And then it's 12 to 14 days sail to say, Tokyo or something like that, Busan,
okay.
Korea. So we're looking at total inside a 20-day door to door. Previously, it was, 35 plus. So
Yeah,
they have tremendous time gain on, their supply chain, which is, I don't have to explain to you what that means.
yeah, no, absolutely. This is really interesting, Greg. So in the time we have left here, why don't we just shift gears for a second here? I'd just be sort of curious as far as what you view as sort of some of the main issues or challenges within intermodal logistics. I mean, just this can be from more of a general perspective. I know you obviously have a very strong relationship with the BN, but there has been a lot of attention over the last, I don't know, we'll call it 15 to 18 months, especially just about the current state of rail service. It needs to keep improving. The pandemic certainly did a number on it for a whole host of reasons that would take longer than we have to get into. But what are sort of, what are sort of the big challenges or things that you're monitoring sort of from a market/industry perspective as it relates to how you guys go about your day-to-day operations?
Yeah. So, that's an interesting question. I want to be sensitive that, I work collaboratively with the railroad. So, I have to, I have to have,
No,
some sensitivity. But I appreciate the question, and certainly, I'm an advocate of having, a rail network in the United States that is, going to set the standard for the rest of the world.
of course.
And also, supply the necessary, things to the shippers that are going to be expected in terms of reliability, okay, in terms of capacity, access and availability, and really in the United States, it's interesting, for since in the last 50 years, really, there's been a constant and consistent consolidation factor in the rail industry. So we just are in the middle of completing probably the last consolidation that'll ever take place in the United States, the merger between the Canadian Pacific and
Yes.
The Kansas City Southern. Yep. So that's going to be it, in my opinion. I don't think you'll ever see another merger that'll pass the STB.
Yeah.
So that gives us 6 Class 1 railroad. Six Class 1 railroads. That merger takes us to 6. We're at 7. We're going to drop.
Yeah, down from 7. Yep.
So. Yeah, now you have an oligopoly with 6. You've had one; it's an oligopoly, and with that, there's a tremendous amount of competitive, environment that's taken place for the last, say, 25 years or so, where costs have been an extreme constant in making their operating ratio where it needs to be to please Wall Street and also maintain a positive and successful enterprise. So I think what you probably see now is hopefully, these railroads will shift from, operating ratio drive and cost to benefit, a more stable situation of not furloughing crews, for example, those kinds of things that are impacting the, the service of the railroad.
Mm-hmm.
I think the pandemic, just to kind of give the railroad, a little credit here, certainly affected, reliability, because you really did have an accelerator of, having labor issues. Okay. And they already faced a very serious problem because the aging effect of their engineers, their conductors, and, their operating people was hitting kind of like this tipping point of retirement, and their ability to really to attract young professionals into that industry, the labor market, they're at a disadvantage.
Yeah.
Does your kid want to go be a conductor on a railroad? I mean, it's kind of like it really was tricky for them. So for them to pivot, they really, I think, became pretty successful at, both with compensation strategies and also kind of reinventing, what it means to work for the railroad. And they started to attract, a different kind of employee.
Yeah.
You go meet a conductor today, it's different than the conductor you met 25 years ago. Believe me, he doesn't have the same conductor hat on and, barely a high school education. A lot of them have MBAs. It's quite unusual.
Yeah.
But they've been very successful at doing that. And I think that it may take a little time, but the pandemic slowed that down and caused a bit of an issue. But I believe the railroad's going to pivot into a professional class of operational employees that is well educated, and they're going to have, the competition for labor is going to shift in their favor, I think.
Yeah, no, I think that's very fair. Well, look, Greg, this brings us to the end of our allotted time for today's recording. So on behalf of Logistics Management Magazine and the Peerless Media Supply Chain Group, I want to offer up a big thanks for you to join us today and for all of us to learn a lot about Rail Modal Group. For those of you out there listening, please check out the Rail Modal Group website, just simply railmodalgroup.com. Greg, can people hit you up on LinkedIn? Do you have a LinkedIn profile?
So let me just correct that. So Jeff, it's actually Rail Modal Group is consolidated with another company, which is called NORAG, Norag. So actually we're a family of companies, and they're all held under a holding company. But if your viewers want, or your podcast listeners want to really check out our company, go to NORAG, Norag. That will encompass RMG and the whole holding company. So it's NORAG. Actually, that's a good question. I think let me look it up.
Yeah, take your time. We got a couple minutes here.
So, well, why don't you finish up then?
Yeah, no. So for those of you out there, so Greg said NORAG, but and again, I just want to mention to the listeners out there, if you're on Twitter, please feel free to give us a follow. It's simply at LogisticsMGMT. And also, if you're not subscribed to our podcast, please go ahead and add us. It's Supply Chain 24/7, wherever you get your podcast. And Greg, once more, thanks again. I never thought I'd have someone from from the Albany Academy on the podcast, so this is historic in a sense. I really appreciate you spending some time with us today.
Yeah, thanks, Jeff.
Yeah,
go Cadets, right?
Yeah, go Cadets is right. Absolutely. All right, everyone. Thanks a lot. Have a good one, and we'll see you next time.